Welcome to the Daily Faceoff Show, your everyday source for the latest news with top-notch insight and analysis. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Welcome into a May 31st edition of the Daily Faceoff Show, the final day of May, and we are here to recap the final day of round 2 of the playoffs, which was, Mike, a wildly unpredictable second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs as well, when you look at not just who won the series, but how quick some of those series ended.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we really expected to see Edmonton get out of Calgary in 5 games, but here we are. And then looking at the Eastern Conference, the full sweep by Tampa, Florida, surprising. I would expected that to have gone at least 5 or 6 and gone either direction. So, Tyler, who knows what we're going to face here in the second round, but we are down to the nitty gritty. 4 teams left and plenty of excitement heading into this first game tonight.
Yeah, if you would have probably asked a lot of people which series in the second round in the East would end in a sweep, a lot of people probably would have said, oh, Carolina will sweep away the Rangers. Not the case. That series goes the distance. Let's recap what we saw in Game 7 last night, throwing 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock. It was the Rangers coming out on top, and it was their big guns carrying them to victory. Chris Kreider is now up to 15 career goals in elimination games. Igor Shesterkin stops 37 pucks in the winning effort as well. You look at Mika Zibanejad, 3 apples on the game. Game 7s are weird, Mike. You never know those little moments throughout a game that are really going to flip things on their head. And for the Rangers, it was getting some timely saves early from Shesterkin, and then you get a couple of bounces to go your way. You find the back of the net, and all of a sudden you're sitting there 10, 15 minutes in the game going, holy smokes, we're in the driver's seat, and they never looked back.
They didn't. And Carolina had a lot to do with this in giving the Rangers momentum. The Rangers scored 2 power play goals in the first 10 minutes. And the key part of this for me, though, is that even though after the Rangers scored their first power play goal that Fox scores, Carolina had an opportunity on the power play and they couldn't cash in on it. That goes by the wayside. And I thought that was a critical moment. And then the Rangers go and score a second power play goal. Kreider buries that deflection from Zibanejad. And 5 seconds later off the faceoff, Shesterkin made a massive save. Svechnikov to Teravainen right in the slot. I'm out of my recliner in the living room watching it. Kept the game at 2-0, and that was it for me. It was over from there. And I think you also look at the fact that Trouba knocked Seth Jarvis out of the game with a massive hit, and all of that occurred in the first period. And I think it took all the wind out of the sails for the Carolina Hurricanes. It got exacerbated when Antti Ranta once again is injured and Kochetkov comes into the game. He's not up to the task. So you can look at this in different ways. Did the Rangers win it? Yeah, they did things well. They executed on the power play. They got big saves. But Carolina also had some really poor defensive showings, Tyler. Slavin was -3, Aho -2, Niederreiter -3, DeAngelo -3. Like, those are your best players, and they're matched up against New York's who have that strong of a game. It's not going to be a winning combination.
Yeah, it's interesting in this second round to see just how often star power has been carrying teams to victories. And you look at Carolina, a guy like Sebastian Aho, he didn't score a goal on the road in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And then you look on the other side there, and what we've been flashing up with the Rangers, where Mika Zibanejad is having a tremendous playoffs. Chris Kreider comes through with a couple of big goals, and then obviously the star power between the pipes for the Rangers. Igor Shesterkin in the 4 wins against Carolina, 43, 30, 37, 37. That's how many saves he made in those wins. We're going to have more on the goaltending in just a second here with another edition of the Blue Paint coming up. But now the Rangers shift their focus to a series against the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champions, trying to do what no one's been able to do the last couple of years, and that's beat the Lightning in a best of 7. The Rangers went 3-0 against Tampa during the regular season, but I'm sure the Lightning would sit there and say, crumple up what happened in the regular season, throw it out. It doesn't matter. The Rangers might sit there and go, no, it shows we can play with these guys. What's your initial read on this series, Mike? And do you give the Rangers much of a shot?
Well, I think the Rangers have a chance if they win game 1 and 2 of the series. To me, that has to happen because you're looking at a scenario where the Tampa Bay Lightning haven't played in quite a few days, right? They're rested, they're getting healthier, and they're going to be able to use that energy, hoping that they're not rusty. The flip side is that the Rangers have just been playing games. They just keep continuing to roll, but they've played 14 games now at this point. Does fatigue start to factor in if it ends up being a longer series? And that's why I think absolutely tomorrow night, the Rangers have to be strong. And what worries me about the Rangers, though, is they've had a few no-show games in the playoffs this year, and those could get ugly against Tampa Bay. This is a different animal. This is a much more offensively minded team with Tampa. And I think for the Rangers too, and I'm sticking really heavy on them here for reasons because Panarin and Strome have to be better for them. They have not had the playoffs necessary to compete in the third round, if you ask me. And then you need somebody on the kid line to step up other than Hedel. Lafreniere, Capo Caco, one of those two is going to have to be better. And for Tampa, I think it's just a matter of making sure that they're not rusty from the start and sticking to their guns. Because even with Braden Point out of the lineup, Tyler, this is a team that relies on their ethos, their system, their star power, everything in Tampa, and they believe.
Yeah, and I mean, it'll be interesting. You mentioned it, the Lightning haven't played in a while here, and you're going to take on a Rangers team that's probably feeling on top of the world after a big road victory in a game 7. You're a guy who's been on playoff runs before,
Mhm.
Mike. Is there one of those you preferred? Like, where if you swept a team and you got a break, did you sit there and go, nice chance to just kind of kick back, catch our breath, and relax? Or did you like being in the rhythm of, no, we're just going to keep rolling, like almost a team of destiny kind of vibe, where we're playing every second night, we're just going to find a way to get it done?
I really liked having a couple days off. I thought that was great. You'd have a big volleyball match or do some grilling outside like we did in Texas the one year. But I think realistically, though, the best teams I was on were able to roll it. I remember one series where uh, we played one night, bus next, play the next day in the second series, and we were done very fast with it. So I think it's probably better to play a little bit closer if you can, but it just comes down to mindset, comes down to systems and if you're able to stick to it and get to your game the fastest.
Series opens up at MSG, and you mentioned it earlier, taking the words out of my mouth. Early in this series will be absolutely huge for the New York Rangers. That game, or that series, starts on Wednesday. Tonight, though, is the start of the Western Conference Final out in Denver, Colorado. It's Nathan MacKinnon in the Avalanche taking on Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers. The season series between these two was actually pretty tight. It was the Avs winning 2 out of the 3, but the Avs 2 wins both coming in extra time. Mike, let's do a little keys to victory here in the series for either side, starting with the Edmonton Oilers. What does Edmonton need to do to win this series?
Well, Edmonton's got to stick to their game plan. And under Jay Woodcroft, to me, that's a hardworking team that's not afraid to play every line that they need to. Now, I know they've been heavy on McDavid and Draisaitl, with Draisaitl having an ankle injury that he's been playing through. But I think it's really important for Edmonton to utilize their depth and play fast because you think about McLeod and Yamamoto, Fogle, like those guys have to skate. That's the depth of Edmonton. And you almost think that the top lines of these two clubs are going to cancel each other out between McDavid and McKinnon. So if I'm Edmonton, I really want to feature heavy with Ryan Nugent Hopkins against McKinnon rather than McDavid against McKinnon when you're looking at matchups. And Edmonton has to compete, Tyler. There's no way around it that if they don't challenge Colorado for loose pucks all over the ice and win board battles, and they're diligent about keeping things in the offensive zone, it's going to be tough for Edmonton Oilers because Colorado is so deep. And they've been getting scoring through their lineup. So those are things for Edmonton I look for, Tyler. And then if we go the other direction now and we go over to Colorado, I think the Kadri line is the key for them. They want to keep him against McDavid whenever you can. And I think this is where Jared Bednar is really going to play in, the coach of the Avalanche. He's got to push the right buttons in this series. Does he run Landeskog, McKinnon, Rantanen out together often? Does he switch that up and put Landeskog with Kadri and Lehkonen to go up against the McDavid line? Those are things that I want to keep an eye on. I think that for Colorado, their defensemen have to be better than Edmonton's. They have to have more offensive input and beat them. They have to keep a third man high and not feed Edmonton's rush. But more than anything, Tyler, I think Darcy Kemper is going to be called upon in this series. He's going to have to steal a game. He's going to have to find a new gear because he has not been challenged yet very much through 2 series.
Yeah, he hasn't had to face a ton of rubber through 2 rounds, and Edmonton is a team that can throw a lot of rubber at you when they really get rolling. My keys for either side for Edmonton, you kind of touched on it. It's getting those second and third lines rolling. If they're going to win the series, yes, they're going to need 97, 29, and even Evander Kane to kind of have their way and get their goals. But that won't be enough against a Colorado team that's very deep. You're going to need the McLeods, the Yamamotos to find a way to produce. And for Colorado, I really do think that second line with Kadri, if he can just, you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to stop Connor McDavid, but slow him down. And that should be enough to propel them to victory. It will be fascinating to see how things play out here in game 1 of the Western Conference Final tonight. We'll get back to the playoff talk in just a second, but for now, we're going to continue our down and out series by taking a look at the Washington Capitals. And it was a fairly disappointing season for the Washington Capitals. Their lowest points per game as a team in the last 8 seasons here. but they're heading into an offseason where they have almost $9 million in cap space. They have 13 forwards under contract, 5 D-men, but no goalies signed. Before they do anything, Mike, it's fair to say they need to get the goaltending figured out and make some decisions there.
Yeah, and it's not just because Vanacek and Samsonov are pending free agents here, Tyler. It's because all season long there were question marks in goal, and Peter Laviolette, the head coach of the Capitals, repeatedly said he's trying to find any level of consistency from his goaltending, somebody who he can trust. And for a lot of the year, that was Vitek Vanacek, and that's reflected in his regular season numbers, which are really a little bit below average in the league. But he had moments where he was real strong. Now, I don't know what Vanacek's ceiling is in the NHL. I think he's a good 1B. I'm not sure he could be a full-blown starter. Samsonov has the potential to be that given his draft status, but I have a word on the street, man, is that Washington really wasn't happy with Samsonov, and they don't know what they have there. And that's a bad place to be for a former first rounder at this age like Samsonov. And he did get to play in playoffs, but I just find there's so much inconsistency to his game. They've got to figure this out in Washington because I don't see them running both goaltenders back. And if I'm them, I'm trying to figure out the right mix. And then you look at the rest of the team, like you said, Tyler. You know, Backstrom's got injury problems. Tom Wilson's out for a while, Hagelin as well. They're going to have to be able to plug those gaps for part of the season. But I think getting Mantha back helped them a lot last year. Defense, they're going to have to make decisions, though, right? Like Justin Schultz, do you bring him back? He's a pending UFA. Carlson is the only D signed through next season. So there's a crunch coming there, Tyler, that I suspect they'd want to get ahead of, especially with maybe Dmitry Orlov, or even let someone like a Lucas Johansson graduate from the American League, first rounder at his best year in the A. So there's a lot to do, but I think it's mostly tweaking in Washington, Tyler, than it would be major overhaul.
Yeah, and see, that's where I'm a little bit interested because I just look at the makeup of that team. And if I was in the front office of the Capitals, I'd be sitting there going, okay, the Rangers aren't getting worse next year. The Lightning are clearly showing no signs of slowing down at all. You know, the Canes are hungry for a bounce back. And I'd look around and go, what are we going to do to get these other teams level? Because we clearly weren't there. They were the 8th seed. They didn't make it out of the first round, even though they looked good against Florida. I wonder if maybe they take a look at a core piece or two and say, all right, is that a spot where maybe we need to just freshen up the way we look and try to breathe some new life into this thing? Or like you said, will it just be depth pieces? Will they just maybe touch up around the edges and hope that an Alex Ovechkin-led team can have a bit of a spark next season? It'll be really, really interesting to see how the next 2 months play on Washington.
Yeah, and I think really once they figure out goaltending, that's going to matter. You know, if they can find a way to get somebody in with a little bit of clout in that crease, that could be the catalyst that they need. I think that was missing all year, and it would give them a lot of confidence as a group.
It will be interesting to see how things play out in Washington. For now, though, let's circle back to the playoff talk and get some goalie previews for the conference finals with another edition of the Blue Paint. As always, the Blue Paint is delivered by our friends at DoorDash. And Mike, 2 series, one gets going tonight. The goaltending matchups are each very fascinating for kind of different reasons, but let's start out west where it's Mike Smith going up against Darcy Kemper. What do you see with these two?
Well, Mike Smith's been riding a pretty long hot streak at this point, Tyler, dating back to the regular season for me. And I think that he was a big reason why the Edmonton Oilers were able to turn the corner, is that Smith got healthy and started to play really well. And you look at Smith's numbers throughout playoffs right now, and they're really solid, 9.27. And then you flip to last round against Calgary, though, and they did take a dip. Now, I want to point this out, though. I think part of that dip was from a pretty disastrous game 1 where Smith got the hook in it. But realistically, look at the amount of shots he's facing. Over 37 shots a game for Mike Smith. And you look at that 907 save percentage against Calgary. Well, he had a 3.4 goals against. He's facing that much rubber. So to me, that indicates that he's making big saves and able to close out games when he has to get the win. And I've just been impressed by how he's handled adversity and his resiliency. He's bounced back after tough games in playoffs. Like, he's the ultimate battler, and his puck handling is a huge asset for Edmonton. It's something that Colorado is going to have to be good about. Colorado cannot let Mike Smith handle the puck outside of his crease. They're going to have to get him deep in his net, try to pick corners, get pucks moving. When you look over at Kemper, and man, I just don't know where he is right now. He's been fine. Okay. Like, his numbers are, for the playoffs, they're fine. But last series against St. Louis, Tyler, he got beat clean on a couple of occasions. And I just wonder, as a former goaltender, if Kemper couldn't find any rhythm, tracking pucks, getting to your place, beating the pass on time. That's hard to do when you're not seeing a lot of shots. It's easy to get complacent when you're watching the other goalie at the other end. So I actually think a game with a lot of shots to begin would be really good for Kemper. He's going to have to be good against rush chances on Edmonton. He's going to have to be active with his stick and tight to keep McDavid from utilizing the front of crease as a personal play area. And bottom line here, I said this earlier, one of these two is going to have to steal a game before the series is over, Tyler.
Yeah, it's going to be stealing games. And I also think there's the element of avoiding big mistakes. You think back to Darcy Kemper allowing that goal from Bozak in overtime. You think back to Mike Smith getting yanked in game one, allowing, as you put it, the field goal to Rasmus Anderson. And now the Oilers were able to overcome that mistake against Calgary in the second round. But will they be able to overcome those kind of mistakes if they happen against a team like Colorado? I'm just not so sure. So stealing games, one side of it. Also, just not being the goalie who makes that final mistake in a game could be big. Out east, it is Kevin Woodley from Ingo Magazine described this matchup as, I think, goalie porn, Mike. Shesterkin versus Vasilevsky, two of the best in the world. It's a real treat.
Well, Woody's right, and Woody's a good friend. And I've got a piece out now on Daily Faceoff that's previewing these two playoff matches. And this Shesterkin versus Vasilevsky matchup is everything we've hoped for in the goalie world. You've got the best money goaltender on earth, who's really the gold standard in Andrei Vasilevsky, versus what's deemed as the young upstart in the league in Shesterkin, who was the best goalie during the regular season. Now, what's ironic to me is that Shesterkin's 26 years old, Vasilevsky's 27. So really, these two are right in that same ballpark. And Shesterkin's a more mature goalie than people realize. He played 3 full seasons in the Continental Hockey League in Russia. This is his second year in the NHL. But what I find about Shesterkin to be powerful heading into this round is that he's now won 2 straight Game 7s. He knows that pressure. He knows what it took to get to the emotional level necessary to be invested enough to win games in the playoffs over here. And you look at how Shesterkin's performed against the Lightning this year. He's been lights out. 3-0 against the Lightning, .958 save percentage, and 1 shutout. To me, that says a lot about who he's going up against. Like, think about it, dude. If you're both from a country, if you're both from Russia and you're going against one another, there's bragging rights on the line. There's Olympics on the line down the road if we can ever get players back there. And I think that plays into Shesterkin's game against Vasilevsky, who, I mean, like, look at the accolades for Vasilevsky. 10 in a row, potential elimination games he's won, an NHL record 6 shutouts during those. And I think for Vasilevsky, what's going to be challenging is that the Rangers are much better at getting traffic to the front of the net than Florida or Toronto were. And that's going to be the new challenge for Vasilevsky, to manage that traffic, find lanes, find windows, because the Rangers can be opportunistic. They'll be good on the rush. This is a matchup. This is similar to Hart and Fleury last year, Tyler. That was great stuff. We're looking at it now, but this is a matchup that could play out over the next decade. Shesterkin versus Vasilevsky.
Yeah, it's going to be unreal. And I think it goes back to a point you made earlier for the Rangers, at least. You need to start quick in this series. Those 2 games on home ice, I think you need to go out and kind of, just even for your mental psyche, if you can beat Vasilevsky a few times and kind of say, okay, all this guy that everyone's hyping up is unbeatable. We found a way to get to him. We found a way to get a couple of wins, because we know Tampa's good on home ice and we know Vasilevsky just gets better as series go on. So I think getting to him early, it sounds obvious, but that's going to be a big, big key for the Rangers.
Yep, that's what I was mentioning before, is that I just feel like if the Rangers can win those first 2 games in MSG, man, it's going to give them a way better chance, because like you said, Vasilevsky only gets better as it goes. And I do think that fatigue factor is real for the Rangers, that, man, after 2 hard-fought series, you want to get up and try to get one going as quick as you can here against the Lightning. You don't want another 7-game series if you're New York.
2 goaltending matchups that are both equally interesting for a handful of different reasons. Fantastic insight as always, Mike. This has been another edition of The Blue Paint, delivered by our friends at DoorDash. DFODD, DFODDUS are those promo codes. They get you 25% off and no delivery fees on your first order. Shout out to DoorDash. Moving along to our daily Faceoff Inbox question, hashtag AskDFO. Send in your questions. 4 teams are moving on. That means 4 teams are going home after the second round. The question is, which second round loser will be the busiest this summer, Mike?
There's a couple you could look at, and I'd say Florida is going to need a bit of work. They need an entire line of forwards, but they're pretty stout in D and goal. So I'm looking squarely at the Calgary Flames. And I mean, they've got 6 forwards and 3D under contract for next season. So GM Brad Treliving has a lot of work to do and some big names. You've got Gaudreau, Kachuk, Mangiapane, Shillington. They all need contracts. And then there's even more below. I mean, as your second grouping of players, you still have Goodbranson and Zadorov that don't have a deal either. So I think there's a lot that needs to happen in Calgary. They do have cap space. They have about $27 million to work with, Tyler, but that's going to go really fast when you're talking about Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk. Because to me, I can't see that combination of those two players coming in at anything under $18 million. I just can't. And if that's the case, how much do you have left for Mangiapane and Shillington and those other people I named? It's going to be a tough task for Tree Living this summer.
Yeah, it is. You mentioned it. You see 27 million and you're like, oh, that's a ton of space. You can get a lot done with that. Then you're right. If it's 10 to Goudreau, if it's 8 to Kachuk, if Mangiapane, who's coming off a 35 goal season, if he needs $5 or $6 million, then all of a sudden you're sitting there, you're going to be really pinching your pennies and you haven't touched your blue line yet. Just a little behind the scenes here. My answers I had written down in my notes were Calgary, or I'll say Florida if Mike says Calgary, but you took them both, Mike. So
Oh man, I ruined it for you. But yeah, like I mean, look at
no,
Florida. They
the
will
Florida
need some
angle's
work too. I
interesting,
mean,
right?
yeah,
Like with Giroux
yeah.
and Sherratt, like 2 guys you paid a lot to bring in. Can you afford to keep those guys? Do you want to keep those guys? How disappointed are you from the sweep at Tampa? Do you feel the need to make a change? Huberto's eligible for an extension. Florida is just going to be a fascinating team to watch.
I agree. And I think Giroux is a really interesting one. I mean, he was okay to going to Florida. He wanted to go there. That was his chosen spot. He's made a ton of cake in his career. He just wants to win. Like, would he take a bit of a discount to play somewhere he thinks really has a chance? Tyler, I think that's realistic. So those are always factors that sometimes we don't see when we're above the surface. And you get surprising deals sometimes. Like look at Mark Giordano in Toronto, 2 years at league minimum. That's what a steal for the Maple Leafs, but it's purely because the player wanted to be there.
It's a great point on Giroux. Actually, I never even considered the possibility. Maybe he does just really want to win. Maybe he loves it in Florida. I mean, obviously, there's something to it as he chose to go there. A couple of teams, Calgary and Florida, that will be interesting to watch in the offseason. Moving along to our daily bet segment, the Western Conference Final gets going tonight. And I got a couple of plays starting with a series play. And if you take a look at the odds here to win this series and advance to the Stanley Cup Final, it is the Colorado Avalanche coming in as heavy favorites at minus 270, the Oilers at plus 210, but it's actually a player prop I like in this series, and I hit it in round 2, so I'm just rolling it over into round 3 here. Evander Kane over 2.5 goals is set at minus 140. That's not a great payout by any means, but this guy has a hat trick in round 1 and a hat trick in round 2, and he's the playoffs leading goal scorer. I just look at that and I go, minus 140 for a guy who has 2 hat tricks already to just score 3 goals in the series as a whole. He can very easily do that in one game. He's got a bit of a thing for empty net goals as well, as the Oilers like throwing him on the ice late in games. I love Evander Kane over 2.5 goals on the series at minus 140. Tonight, specifically with game 1, it's interesting to note that the Oilers aren't actually as big of favorites as they are, or big of underdogs as they are on the series. Plus 210 to win the series, but only plus 165 to win tonight. Maybe some insight. The sportsbooks think maybe the Oilers have a shot to steal one here in game 1. You never know how public money kind of pushes these things, but I do have a player prop in this one that I like, and I'm going between the pipes. Mike Smith over 32.5 saves is the spot I'm going with. The Colorado Avalanche have put up 34 plus shots on goal in 8 of their 10 games so far in the playoffs. As long as Mike Smith, doesn't get yanked like he did in game 1 against Calgary, he's likely going to face a ton of rubber tonight. And while he didn't rack up the saves to this number that often against Calgary, just once in the 5 games in that series, I think the extra volume he could face from the Avalanche tonight, it could propel this thing to hit the over. 32.5 at an almost even money payout is a good enough spot for me. So I'm taking Evander Kane over 2.5 on the series. Mike Smith over 32.5 saves tonight. Mike, I think he could be real busy in this series opener.
I think that's a really good pick, and I've ridden that line before. I believe last series I had Smith for one of those at plus 35, and sure enough, he got it again. The Oilers are giving up over 37 shots per game. To me, that seems like easy money, Tyler.
Easy money. It's never actually that easy, but in theory, it feels like easy money right now. Moving along to garbage time. Mike, I'm going to handle this one. And that Rangers-Canes series, at times, I'll just come out and say it was kind of boring. I found myself kind of going in and out and being like, okay, it's another low-scoring, grinded-out affair. But one guy who kept me involved in that series was Ray Ferraro. Just without a doubt, the best color commentator in the game. He's just so real. And sometimes, you get to broadcasting at that level, it can sometimes sound too polished. That's not the case with Ray. You always know how he's feeling. You're always getting A+ insight. And I loved the moment yesterday where he's talking while the play's going on about how, if the Canes just get one here, and then he stops and the Rangers score, and you just hear Ferraro in the background go, never mind. It's just tremendous insight. I always, if Ferraro's on the broadcast, it's much watched TV for me. So I wanted to give some love to the man who used to be called the little ball of hate. And now I guess maybe you'd call him, the little ball of excellent analysis?
Yeah, well, I'd call him somebody that I very much look up to. I mean, having done ice level at least once, I mean, like Ray's somebody that you see as a gold standard, him and Darren Pang and others that have done it for so long that are so good at it. The level of insight that Ray gives in real time while capturing the emotion of it, like you said, the perfect timing of the Rangers goal, and never mind, that's pretty high level stuff. So he's fun to listen to, not just from the entertainment aspect, but from people like myself who've been trying to learn that craft and occasionally do it. He's a great archetype. He's kind of like the Vasilevsky of the broadcasting world.
Yeah, it's an art form, and Ray is certainly one of the best at it. That's going to do it for another edition of the Daily Faceoff Show. From Mike McKenna and our technical producer, Alex Allard. Enjoy Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, and keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com. In the meantime, we'll be back tomorrow.
Thanks for watching the Daily Faceoff Show.
Make sure you hit subscribe on our YouTube channel to never miss an episode.